Very awesome. So the first sort of observation and therefore question I had after hearing from all of you guys was some really brilliant common themes throughout your talks. And I think one of the common themes that people were stumbling on is this idea of, particularly in Abbey, you were talking about not making girls feel different and making women singled out and when a woman gets on stage, call her a speaker, not a woman, and all these sorts of ideas. And it made me wonder, is us talking about women in STEM, having brilliant organisations like STEMettes or Robo Girls, or are we segmenting girls and making them feel different purely by trying to make them feel like part of the conversation? I'm just wondering what you guys think about that. Maybe Anne-Marie, you want to start after you do STEMettes.
Sorry, I thought you were directing at someone else. So I think it's really important actually that we have girls-only spaces. I think there's a lot of benefit, and there's a lot. You almost kind of need to give certain girls, not all girls, because they're not all the same, just like not all boys the same, not all young people the same, but there are some girls that need that safe space. So I, for example, didn't, which is why I've ended up in industry, but I realised that there are a lot more people who maybe ended up studying history because all their friends were doing history, and so that's something they've now done in life, and why wouldn't we have that for science or tech or whatever? I do also think, though, that talking about women in STEM is quite important because it hasn't been talked about enough. That makes sense. So if we talk about the history that I was mentioned, it's because when you talk about scientists, or I'm trying to remember engineers or whoever, it's all male, names that get pulled. So there's another image that I have. I went to a girls' secondary school in East London actually, and was in their maths department, and there was a wall display of famous scientists and engineers. And bear in mind, this is a girls' school, right? And it was like the usual suspects, all dead and white and male. And it was like, okay, no one's talking to them about those women in STEM. So as much as we might have it a lot in our echo chamber, outside of this, not as many people. I mean, ALD is definitely helping with that. At least one day it trends. And we will go, oh God, what? There's women in STEM? The first programme was a woman? What? But the rest of the time it's almost forgotten that women in STEM exist, and it's not something they talk about enough. So hopefully we'll get to a point where it is kind of everyone's like, yeah, we know women teach kind of thing. But for now, we definitely still need those spaces for those girls.
Yeah. What about yourself? I was going to go straight to you.
So I've got two different experiences of this. I'm also one of the directors for Winchester Science Festival, and we had a conversation a couple of years ago about whether we wanted to make it a women's only festival, and we want maybe have a women's day and advertise the fact that it was only female speakers. And we went back and forth a lot about that, but in the end decided that we'd rather it was it was just something that happened. We behind the scenes tried to make sure that our speakers were diverse and that we had a gender balance, but we didn't really want people to feel like they were invited only because they were women. We didn't want if you have a Women's Day or whatever at a festival, which sounds awful anyway, you then run the risk of being in the echo chamber again of only certain audience types coming to it. But I think I agree that when you're discussing sort of school age and at that sort of key time where they are so aware of what everything else is, or all the pressures on them and what's expected of them, that to be able to, I notice it when you take the girls away from the boys in a classroom, they're completely different, like the dynamic completely changes.
I actually wanted to add to that. So it was at Ada Lovelace Day Live last year that the three of us, I believe, got interviewed by a chap from the BBC World Service. And it turns out, was it all three of us had been to single-sex schools?
Yeah.
So for us, I mean particularly, certainly for me, science was never gendered. Nothing was gendered as a subject. But we were very lucky to be in that situation where it couldn't have been gendered, because then we just would never have done any science, But I think in that aspect it is important to create those sort of safe spaces and things. But I also agree that you don't have to label it. So one of the things, science show-off is a thing that happens, and the organiser of that has had several nights where the entire lineup of 10 people have been women. He's never labelled it as a women's night, because that would be weird. But it happens, and nobody seems to bat an eyelid. I don't think anyone has even realised that it is giving a platform for female scientists and engineers to do brilliant things without being the token women.
And what about, oh sorry, on you go, Michelle.
I was just going to say, when we've talked to the people from the RoboGals organization, and first of all, it's really important to note that we don't have exclusively female volunteers. So the university students going out into the schools are both men and women, but the students that we're teaching are all girls, and I think the environment is definitely different, and their sort of willingness to speak up is different. But it comes back to that information gap that I was talking about as well, that when RoboGals has interviewed girls at university level in the UK and asked them why they wanted to go into engineering, it was always because they knew someone who was an engineer. And so introducing girls to people who are engineers is something that's specifically different in who actually then goes on to study it.
I think that's a really interesting point that you raised, and also building on Anne-Marie, this idea of, you know, what is it that, you know, younger kids are actually relating to, and you know, you talked a lot about your third reason for talking about things was like swag and free food, and you know, it makes me think, why did I studied maths. Why did I study maths? And it's because I loved my teacher. I didn't study history because I really hated my teacher, and it was nothing to do. I love history, so you know, I wonder, are we focusing enough on these sorts of, I guess, they're kind of thought of as secondary things, when instead, you know, we're focusing on, we should make sure girls know how to code and make games and things. Are we focusing enough on, are we got enough really fun teachers that girls want to relate to? Are we, you know, it goes back to the idea of role models and people who are relatable. So you were talking about role models at the start.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, role models are essential, because, you know, the whole phrase of, you know, you can't be what you can't see. And I think our challenge is to think about what really is happening kind of just about pre-birth through till age 10. Is because, you know, there's some sort of like evidence that you talk to the bump differently if you know that it's a boy compared to a girl, and from birth we're treating girls and boys differently. And as children develop their self-identity, and as girls develop their self-identity, they are ruling themselves out of STEM. And I think that's not just about role models in terms of people like Marie Curie or Ada Lovelace. It's also about, you know, who's in their life, and STEM capital has been mentioned already, and how important it is for children to experience STEM as just a normal part of everyday life. And I would like to see sort of more focus on kind of kindergarten and primary school. And actually, you know, there's already a problem with a lack of gender balance in primary school teachers, and I think that may also lead to a lack of gender balance in how we're engaging very, very small children with STEM as well. And actually, when you're young, your role models are the people who are around you. So one of my role models was Mrs. Gray, who was my maths teacher. And she had worked on optical sights for tanks. And I remember very distinctly the day that we found this out in class, and all of the boys were just like, oh my God. And so was I. I was like, that is so cool. And then suddenly she has this sort of newfound respect from everyone in the class. And so, you know, when we're thinking about, I mean, I was lucky to have a female math teacher, but all my other science teachers were male, and I didn't have the same response to them. You know, even when they were funny and great teachers, I didn't have the same sort of connection. And so I think we really need to look at, what does it mean to be a role model to a toddler?
Yeah, what is it that people care about? I think it's almost a marketing question in some ways. You know, respect your audience, know your audience. You know, maybe it's not about trying to make something sciencey more whiz bang. Maybe it's about giving out free food, or, you know, giving out swag. You know, it's playing to that emotional side. Something else that I kind of noticed that you guys were talking about, touched on a little bit, was this idea of, particularly Khalil and Pete were talking about getting enough female voices on your platforms. And we also spoke about it in terms of on speaker panels. And I wondered what your guys' thoughts were on sort of quotas versus good representation, because the unfortunate fact is, across the board, there are more men, and we need to change that. But should we be having 50% conferences if, you know, do you see where I'm kind of going with this? So I'd love to hear some of the different voices on this panel.
I would
as much as I guess in theory I would like quotas, in reality it means that we end up inundated with requests, as you know, and it happens to my boss a lot, who's a reader in astrophysics. She gets invited to so many things, partly because she is a woman who is able to speak about her subject well, and then you start getting the guilt of saying no to things, and then you end up spending 5 hours on a train to go somewhere on a Saturday, you know, to speak for half an hour to 20 people or whatever. You know, I would worry about quotas just being too much of a burden, as you say, when you don't have that gender balance in the field to start with. I would argue for public stuff, good speakers are far more important. Because if you go to a public talk by someone who is terrible at speaking, then that's going to put you off the subject, probably more than whether you can relate to them. That'll be my feeling.
Sue's gonna, I'm going to slightly disagree there, because the fundamental premise there is that the opposite of quotas is bad speakers. And I love it if I am the token woman. I'm absolutely fine with being that person on a panel, because frankly I then have a chance to represent women and to give it my best and give it my all and really kind of say, look, you know, I am perfectly capable of being a good public speaker. Thank you very much for this opportunity to communicate with this audience. And I think when you look at quotas, interestingly, there's some evidence from politics about quotas. They introduced quotas in Mexico, I think it was, and the first sort of round of elections, the quality of the candidates nosedived, because it was basically, oh my God, we need to get women on the shortlist. Just, you're a woman, well, you're a woman, you'll do.
It's nothing to be embarrassed about.
I'm left-handed, that's why. But then the next round, because suddenly lots of women saw other women sort of being elected and saw how this system worked, and the quality of the candidates, the female candidates, suddenly kind of skyrocketed. And now they have this sort of situation where actually very quickly the quality of the candidates across the board has risen, because suddenly there are a lot more women going, wait a minute, like, we can do this. And so I think the issue about the burden on the existing women is a very valid one, and I think that is the only really compelling argument against quotas.
So they're 50-50 quotas.
But the question then is why, because there are a lot of women in STEM, so why are only a small number of them being asked to speak? That's the question that underlies that problem. It's not really about quotas, it's about organisers perhaps being lazy, playing safe, and inviting the people that they have already seen, that are in their networks. And one of the things we do with AD Lovelace is really try and reach outside of our networks and try and make sure that we have a range of people at different stages in their careers, and make sure that we get some women who are relatively new at public speaking on stage, as well as people who are really experienced. And for me, that's actually the more important thing. Is quotas are, I personally am in favour of quotas, and I'm in favour of standing up and being the token woman, but I'm also in favour of looking at early career women and saying, okay, what support do you need in order to start being up on stage and speaking in public? Because a lot of women will shy away from that, and they do that, oh, you know, I don't really want to be on stage, and that's a more important question to me.
I mean, that's interesting what you're saying around how can we encourage more women, because if you take, you know, biology, for instance, we talk about the fact that there actually is more women in some, you know, a large percentage in bioengineering. And, you know, one thing you're saying about going in and encouraging women and giving them training and things is brilliant, but, you know, we don't necessarily do that with men. So how can we encourage women in a sort of way that's not singling out and not assuming that they don't want to or can't or need more support? Because does that not feel a little bit like we need to come give the women support so they can speak, but we don't need to do that with the guys?
But the point is that the playing field isn't level. And so what we're doing is we are giving women access to some of the confidence boosting training that men get through other routes. Men already have lots of role models and they're already encouraged, and obviously there are some introvert men who aren't, and that's a separate question in my opinion. What we're doing is saying there is an imbalance and we're just trying to get things level again.
Cool. And what about men? How can we get men more involved in the conversation? Because it's one thing saying, you know, results go up if women are involved or it's important or whatever, but how do we, you know, trigger the emotional system 1 brain of a man to get them more interested in actually wanting to get involved and help?
Can I just jump in and say there's been a hand up?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, apologies. Okay, you can ask your question first then. How about that?
I'm actually quite loud. Volume. So yes, I feel that we think there's a problem in STEM. There obviously is a gender imbalance, but this imbalance is not unique. It exists in CEOs, manager levels of nearly every profession going. And I think it's obviously related to role models and mentors and all of these things, but it's also related to the skills that we think are more male or more female. So the things like confidence, if you asked any scientist, anyone in STEM, what skills do you need to be successful, and then asked other people, are these skills more male or female? With confidence, more male maybe. The willingness to stand up and do a presentation, that more male maybe. Maybe we're thinking about this completely wrong. Maybe we're thinking, oh, well, if we can put more females in front of people, we will succeed. But maybe we actually need to think, no, we need to teach our children that females are confident, females are proficient in all of these skills that are going to get them those jobs, regardless of if they're interested in science or something completely different. Whether they want to be a CEO in charity, or whether they want to be a professor, or whether they want to head up Deloitte, or I don't know, Deutsche Bank. I think we could think more broadly here. I think we could be smarter.
Hear, hear. Did someone else have you had your hand up as well? And then we can take some answers.
I'm not really sure how to voice this actually, but I sometimes do worry a little bit about putting the emphasis on women, because what about the shy man? What about the man that actually wants to spend time at home with the kids? It might not be that he doesn't want to, but it's not an accepted thing. So, and the other thing that worries me is that I think sometimes the most damaging conversations against women in science happen by women, because what one person might find easy in their career, another person might find so hard that it makes them leave. And yet the person that's found it easy can't understand why that person's found it hard, and therefore doesn't have the sympathy for it. So I sometimes do wonder, again, like I might be going about this wrong, that maybe we need to be thinking more like, why are people leaving science generally? And okay, that seems to be more women. So what is it that's making them leave science? What are the physical problems that are occurring? And can we try and make staying in science more flexible, not just for women, but for people who want to work not according to this A happens first, then B must happen, then regardless of whether you've gone away and had a kid, C must happen. You know, I just wonder if the discussion needs to be a bit more about flexibility in general, and also I do worry a little bit about how there are lots of guys, probably most of the people that are here are the guys that are very sympathetic to this problem with women in science, but can sometimes feel a little bit got at. So we need to maybe have a think about our language and the way that we portray the problem sometimes. But I really articulate that very well.
I think you've got two questions there. The first one is about support for men in certain areas. For example, you mentioned kind of shy introvert men, as did I. Yeah, I'd like to see more men, primary school teachers, carers, stay-at-home dads. There are female-coded careers that men are dissuaded from going into, even if they have an interest, and I think that's absolutely a valid concern. And I do have people that come to me and say, when is Ada Lovelace Day going to address this? And my response is, that's actually not my job. My job is very specifically about women in STEM. If someone else wants to take on the men in teaching and caring, I would give them my full support. But the thing is, we have a certain focus, and that focus is just as valid as any other focus. And I think it doesn't particularly to help to kind of say, you know, what do we do about the men? I think your other question about increasing flexibility in the workplace, for example, actually helps all people. It helps men as much as it helps women. The challenge is that we have a bunch of female-coded things that support mostly women, because women are expected to do things like childcare. If we increase the flexibility for everyone, then we are helping women predominantly, and making sure that men can take advantage of that as well is equally important. So I mean, I think there are two sort of just very slightly different issues in your question. And I think the point about paternity leave that was made earlier, getting men to actually take advantage of parental leave is a really hugely important point that really does bear repeating endlessly.
Jen, you had some thoughts?
Well, just to take it back to school age level, which is what I always do because I tend to work with schools outreach. I think that kind of, sort of the points that both of you made are the kind of thing that the Institute of Physics are getting at with this Opening Doors report, and realising that it's not a physics issue, it's not a STEM issue, it's an entire school issue. I think what they found in their Closing Doors report is that a school that has a gender imbalance in physics is likely to have a gender imbalance in a subject that's typically viewed as female. I can't remember off the top of my head which subjects that was. I think it was English. And so this is what we're looking at the moment. As I said, is this a problem for physics outreach officers to tackle? We're going into schools with a project to try and change the whole school attitude, but are we actually doing damage by going in as physicists that it's then still seen at the other subjects as a physics problem?
Yes.
Can I just potentially, this is totally my perspective here, but I don't think it's just getting more women in science, it's getting more men into nursing. The thing is though, that yes, of course we want shy people, anyone that's in some kind of underrepresented group to be heard, but gender is a 50-50-ish issue. So if we're excluding 50% potentially of our population, that's the biggest pool of people we're losing. Beyond that, I feel that we can then start to address some of the other issues. We've got socioeconomic background, we've got ethnicity, we've got religion, but these are, and it sounds horrible, and they're not smaller issues, but by championing stuff like this, I feel that we may be able to bring more people in before we then start looking at those smaller groups.
I think that STEM and women promotion in STEM is fantastically important in the work you're doing. It's brilliant. I'm just trying to voice an opinion that might not otherwise be heard in this FOG.
But we need that. That's exactly what we need, because a lot of people have been saying the same thing for years and years and years, and nothing's happening. So we need, it's moving up, but not fast enough. So you're absolutely right to question that.
The two very quickly, the two main points that I wanted to make, I think, were that from my point of view, the career that I'm in, what needs to happen to make me stay in science is to give me more options, flexibility, and that's because I'm a woman, but I hope that will be applicable to a man as well. The only other thing I want to say briefly is the thing that worried me a little bit was, yes, men in seniority, we do need to make the changes because there is seniority, but it is our problem too, and we need to modulate the way that we speak about it and not make men feel got at, and also to support women, not to just be like, you should just be going for it regardless of how confident you're feeling right now.
I think speaking about men feeling got at, I'm very conscious that neither of you have said anything this entire panel. So I'd like to, maybe we can finish by hearing some of your thoughts and how you feel about some of the things raised.
Well, so there's lots of good points you make there. I think tone is something that I've been thinking about quite a lot recently for all sorts of reasons. And I think one thing that men can do is if they start feeling got at by these sorts of conversations, to sort of really kind of be critical about themselves and think hard about why that's the case. And I think a lot of the time,
just banter.
I think a lot of the time it's thin skins, and I find this a lot in academia, that academia is predominantly about rejection in various forms. So we should be built up to have thick skins. Not that I've had a grant rejected recently or anything like that. But when we start having these sorts of conversations, everybody suddenly gets really defensive all of a sudden. I find that really interesting as a psychologist. So I think we've just got to kind of take a step back and think, I don't know if I felt this. I felt got at sometimes, but then I've taken a step back and thought, well, actually, this conversation isn't about me. It's about a bigger thing, more important thing. So if you can focus on that, hopefully you can rise above specific snarky things that might have happened and kind of get to the issue at hand. The other thing more broadly is that I don't think there's, and I don't think anybody's under this illusion, that there's one thing that will fix all of these issues. What everybody's been saying today is absolutely right, that you've got to fix everything at all stages, and it's going to take time. Hopefully eventually we'll have a situation where loads more men are aware of these problems, and they have kids and they feel confident enough to be able to say to their bosses, no, I'm not coming in today, or I'm get fined for that probably, but I'm going to take that flexi time and things like that. That's just all going to take time, and I think the key at this stage is to, we're all from different backgrounds. Hopefully we'll have conversations with people about these sorts of things. We'll be from different backgrounds, and you can find something that you can do in your particular area that might help. So, for instance, I run a first-year undergrad course called Discovering Science, which is a terrible name for a science communication course, because nobody takes it because they think it's just Science 101. But it's short to Disco Science, so it's great. And the main thing there is about giving people skills in public speaking and writing and thinking about how you present science to different audiences. And we also cover different sorts of contemporary issues. So we talk about climate change, we talk about why video games are melting kids' brains, and we have a session on women in STEM and the issues around that. What we don't do is go, we're going to be talking about women next week, so let's make sure that you're all there. It's just part of the curriculum, and we don't talk about it in any other way. It's just a natural thing that's embedded, and we treat it like that. And that's where you kind of hopefully find that balance, in that it's labelled as Women in STEM session, but it's not made special or different over and above everything else. And it's by far the most popular session that we have, both for the men and the women that we teach. And little things like that will hopefully make massive differences in the future.
Yeah, I think, I don't have an answer to pose this, but I think, with training especially, I think the aim then is to increase the pool of people who actually contribute, so we get more women. One of the most gratifying aspects of working the conversation is a lot of the academics who write for us, it's their first time that they're actually writing for the public or doing any form of communication. So we actually, we don't just work with the science fields, we also work with politics, business, etc. And once they see the process, many of them are actually really infused with the idea of communicating with the public. So just by making sure that they understand how it works, telling them how it works and showing them how it works, showing them that they are in control and they can push their ideas out there, it increases the pool quite significantly. And you get a lot of new people who are suddenly just interested in communicating science and communicating other academic stuff. I think the main thing then is to keep finding ways to increase the pool of people, encourage more people to contribute, and eventually I think we'll get there.
Amazing. I mean, I think we've had so many brilliant actionable insights, both from the panel and from all the talks we had before. lots of different varying opinions, but I think that's what's needed, and to be honest, there's no one-size-fits-all for a lot of these questions. So I think we're going to wrap up there, and if you guys want to continue chatting, we'll all be outside for drinks. I'm assuming most people are staying for the free beers. But thank you so much for listening, and thank you again to all the speakers.